9. We have no A&Rs. So at 6:35, we have a continuation of a public hearing for a special permit site for Vertex Towers LLC, 92 Stallion Hill Road. After that, we'll have an update on the recently adopted historic preservation plan and its application to various boards and committees. Following that, we'll have the town planner update, then old and new business, and then adjournment. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes of hearing 9? Any questions, comments? If not, a motion to approve. Yep. Second. Taylor? Discussion, all in favor? Aye, and
Aye.
we're supposed to give a voice when it...
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, let's see, I guess it's not quite 35. Do you want to go over anything on your update?
Yeah, I can just give you a quick update on the open space and master plan survey that went out at Christmas. We've had really not a great return rate. Out of over 5,000 mailings, we've received only 346 surveys back. So the Sturbridge lacrosse coach was wondering if we could leave it open a little bit. She wanted to do an email to all their Sturbridge families.
Okay.
So I decided today to leave it open until February 1st, and we will post an updated date on the website and on the town's Facebook page. So hopefully we'll get a little better response rate. And then your next meeting dates are February 13th. We have 505 Main. We're still waiting for the alternatives analysis for the bioretention basin. You remember that was an issue at the meeting, so we're still waiting to get additional information on that to review. And then also the solar project at 200 Haynes Street. And they're hoping to be able to address everything by then, but I believe the Conservation Commission may have continued that to February 15th, which would be after our meeting. So we may end up having to continue that one more time. I will keep you posted.
Good. Okay, well, I think it's 6:35. Do you have an update or an introduction to the continuation? Of the public
Yes.
hearing?
So since the last public hearing, peer review and staff review has continued on this project. And with us this evening, we have David Maxon, and he is our wireless professional that was retained to review this project for us. I think probably the best way to handle this would be to allow Mr. Parisi to provide any updates he wishes to provide, and then maybe hear from David Maxon, and then from any questions from the board or the public, which there are none right now. And then you do have my report, which I apologize for getting it to you late this afternoon, but I have provided you with a proposed order of conditions in the event that you choose to grant this approval this evening.
Very good. Thank you very much. Go forward.
Good evening. My name is Francis Parisi, Parisi, representing the applicant, Vertex Towers. We are here tonight seeking a special permit and site plan approval for a telecommunications facility. Since the last meeting, we had a zoning board meeting. I had hoped to avoid the zoning board, and we had designed a facility that was compliant with your zoning bylaw. However, the lot that we were on did not have sufficient frontage on a public right-of-way, and so we required a variance from the zoning board, and the zoning board granted that variance last Wednesday. In addition, we've been communicating back and forth with staff who have asked questions with respect to fire safety, so we provided a lot of data for the fire safety official and staff, which I think you guys have all got copies of. The conservation agent wanted to see some wetlands delineation, which we had done, so we provided that as well. And there was another question with respect to RF safety, which we provided as well. When we left the last meeting, I think the only two open items that the board were interested in hearing from is one, the zoning board, which we did hear from, and the peer review consultant, and which we got his report last week. I would tell you that I also received this afternoon staff comments, and there were several conditions of approval that were mentioned, and we would be amenable to all of them if the board were so inclined to vote favorably tonight. So I think with that, I think the board wants to hear from its consultant, and I'll comment as appropriate after that.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Hi, David.
David?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Well, I guess it's my turn. Thank you. Yeah, where to start? I guess I just kind of summarize the key things in my report.
Wait a minute, David, we can't really. Wait a minute, David, we can't really hear you. Let me see if they can turn it up.
Microphone?
Okay, try it now, David.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. How's
Still a
that?
little low.
Here.
Is it on his side, do you think, that he needs to turn up his volume a bit?
Jackie just turned up the volume.
Uh-oh.
There you go. Now you're
Ah,
better.
that's better.
All right, good. Great. Yeah, so just, what I do is I look at the bylaw to see what the town meeting has decided its requirements are. And obviously, the top level things are avoiding the hazards associated with wireless facilities and to promote responsible deployment of them. One of the things is that the bylaw prioritizes non-residential districts, parcels in non-residential districts over residential districts. And the applicant has said there are no alternatives to place the facility in a non-residential district. I consider that to be plausible because looking at where the non-residential district parcels are, is they're down in the hollow, along State Route 20, and that's not particularly effective for providing wireless coverage. I'm also of the impression that if you were to try to use non-residential parcels or any parcels that are off the high ground, such as this parcel is, you would need multiple towers to cover the same area that this proposed tower would be covering. There is a requirement for the height of the tower to be no more than 15 feet above the tree canopy. That's a kind of a very old standard that a lot of bylaws put in 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I don't know. And the difficulty with that is that if you can get good coverage for one wireless carrier at 15 feet above the average tree canopy within its fall radius, it's very likely that it will only be a tower that will be useful to one wireless carrier. So the applicant has proposed a 130-foot tower. I provided a photograph in my report just showing an aerial view in the wintertime. You can see there's probably, 40% coverage of coniferous trees. And if those are white pines, they could be quite tall, 90 to 110 feet, depending on how old they are. So in that regard, the 130 foot may not be terribly greater than the 15 feet above average tree canopy limitation. And since you have a balloon test and you have the photograph information that the applicant provided, you can judge for yourself whether this height is one that is egregious or whether it's a reasonable compromise in order to get the 4 wireless carriers all on one single tower in this particular area. Rolling ahead. The waiver also, for the tree height, also requires the board to find that there are no alternative locations where a grant would be substantially more in keeping with the purpose of the bylaw. I haven't identified any. Of course, the way I look is using GIS tools and that sort of thing, and my rough familiarity with having been to Sturbridge from time to time. And this is always an opportunity for the board or the public to suggest locations that we might have missed or that the applicant might have missed. But I think in general, the spot that they're proposing is one that tries to strike that balance between being on high ground in order to provide good coverage and being in a wooded area where you can only see it perhaps from a distance, and as to whether or not that's egregious the community. That's for the board and the public to decide. Now, the thing, the bylaw also requires the facility to be camouflaged in a manner that is compatible with its surroundings, with reference to visual impact analysis and simulations. And you have that visual impact analysis and those simulations without any particular camouflage. The simplest form of camouflage is to ensure that the tower is painted and the equipment on the tower is painted all one color. If that's an issue. It might not be at these distances, but other than that, you get into more complicated things, which are expensive, require a lot of maintenance, and sometimes do not look the way people were hoping they would look. And of course, one of those things is the monopine camouflage. So, and in pointing out camouflage, the other one that comes to mind is one that, for instance, in Hollis, New Hampshire, they had the Verizon build a fake fire tower. Close up, it looks really tall and it doesn't look like a fire tower. But from a distance where it's just peaking pretty much above the tree line, it looks more like a natural fire tower. But again, that's an expensive thing to require an applicant to do if it doesn't materially improve the visual impact. So that's the trade-off there. And so the board will have to make a decision about camouflage and to do it in a way that's consistent with whatever it is that the language is that the bylaw allows. And there is this terminology where it says that the tower must be camouflaged unless it is compatible with its surroundings as determined by the planning board. And that's a determination that you can discuss and consider in the process. There is a requirement for using existing structures, and I'm not aware of anything that would even come close to providing the area coverage that we're talking about from this proposed location. The applicant meets the 1 mile rule, and that kind of also speaks to another thing, is that in towns in Massachusetts where the towers are much more than 2 miles apart, and you're going to need a tower in the middle, at least one, because of the way the terrain is and the way coverage works today, as opposed to the way it worked when the bylaws were written, probably originally in about 1997. Safety of the facility, as the applicant has shown, they have to follow the building codes and environmental requirements and all those sorts of things. I reviewed the radio frequency energy emissions analysis, which indicates that the facility will be compliant with the federal FCC safety standards. And as you know, that's as far as the board can go in regulating the facility with respect to the emissions of the facility. As long as it complies with the FCC standards, it gets a green light on that basis. Noise, I did some quick calculations on the noise, and I think it will be fine, especially considering the remoteness of the location. You might have a condition, I think we talked about this, staff, to just require that the sound absorption enclosure that is in the application actually gets installed and maintained. The bylaw also requires some demonstration of compliance with NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. I don't recall seeing that, but that's something that tower companies customarily do. They have to do because their wireless company tenants won't go on the tower unless it has cleared the process. So that's just a question of whether you have enough documentation to satisfy you now, or whether there's other information that you'd like to get on the record regarding NEPA compliance. And then we get into the other aspect of this, which is the Federal Telecommunications Act. If a board denies a permit for a wireless facility, if that denial effectively prohibits the provision of personal wireless services, then the applicant has a cause of action to get the permit anyway. federal court. And so the question for boards is, well, if we don't know until we vote if we're going to deny this. So do we need any additional information to tell us whether or not a denial would be an effective condition of service? And it's a little tricky here because the applicant is a tower company, but they have with them a signed-on tenant in the form of Verizon. I have that right? And with that, they have the coverage needs of Verizon that they're trying to address. And it's pretty clear to me, based on the location of the existing cell sites in the region, and based on the coverage analysis, that there is what to call it, I think I said in one meeting somewhere else, a crying need for improved coverage in this area. So that's something that this proposal would address. And the only other thing is they also provided a documentation from the FCC/FAA tool called TOWAIR. I reviewed that also using an FAA tool that does a very similar thing. And I found out that they have succeeded in being about 100 feet west of the dividing line away from the airport. It's perfectly safe without a light. But if they were 150 feet to the east, they'd probably have to have a light. So congratulations to them for finding just the right spot on the property as well. And that pretty much covers my analysis.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, David. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that or comment?
No, I appreciate the review, and I think you did a very thorough
Great.
job.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, any questions from the board? Taylor, do you have any? Yes, sir. David?
No current questions.
Okay. Wally? Brad?
No questions from me.
I have none. I think we've gone over this quite a bit. There's no one here from the public. We don't have any call in.
No.
Okay. Motion to close the public hearing. Do you have a comment?
I would recommend you don't close the public hearing. This is the same thing that Attorney Eichmann recommended to the ZBA, just in case, as you're going through deciding on the camouflage and things like that, if you needed additional information from Mr. Maxon or Mr.
Right,
Parisi.
that's
So that's what he recommended for ZBA, and I would recommend the same. So you actually have three things that you need to do, and the first would be to discuss if you feel that camouflage is necessary. And so you have my report. I think most of you were able to go to the balloon test and see the visibility. As David said, you could require, be painted. David, are they using like silver now for camouflage still? The silver paint?
Well, the tower themselves
It's usually
are
silver.
galvanized gray.
Gray,
And
okay.
That's often regarded as something that's fairly innocuous.
Right.
But in some cases, they look to have everything painted brown or
Yeah.
forest green,
Well,
Yeah.
or something like that.
Which-
When you were going over that section on the camouflage, I can kind of recall that it was really pretty hard to see the tower from what I saw.
It was.
I really don't.
I think the color of the tower against the background of the sky.
And I
I
barely
think-
saw it once.
I know, yeah, I passed you a few times. So, I mean, that's kind of my opinion, is that I also think that they're more and more commonplace in the landscape, and I think over the next 5 or 10 years, I mean, look at the town zone study that, we need to add several towers for our own emergency communications, but it didn't appear all that visible to me, and I think sometimes if you try too hard, it sticks out even worse. But it's up to the board. So that is one thing that you should discuss.
Okay, well, does anyone have any thoughts on the camouflage?
I don't think it needs camouflage personally. I think it does really stick out when you have a monopole with, the monopole pine look. I mean, it just sticks right out in the landscape, and it's just, as you were saying, it's just like we get used to something. You could say, like, telephone poles on a street are they're not very aesthetically pleasing, but we don't really pay attention to them anymore.
Can I ask you guys a favor? Tomorrow, when you're driving down the Mass Pike, eastbound, and the Charlton Rest area is on the westbound side, there's a cell tower that was tried to look like a tree that's been there for a very long time.
We're all
and it's
aware of
the classic Charlie Brown Christmas tree.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had one zoning board say, you can't put lipstick on a pig. And I took offense to that, but it's kind of true. The more you try to disguise these things, the more you call attention to them. And David mentioned it brown. I had one town said, paint it brown to the tree line and blue above the tree line. But that's all assuming you're standing at the tree height, because if you're a half a mile away, you're looking at a two-tone tower. And it's just, there's been so many attempts to do things that...
There's no camouflage. What are you planning on painting? What color are you planning on painting?
The pole itself is a galvanized steel, which is like the color of a guardrail, which is non-reflective, and it kind of blends in. And we actually, if you look at the sky, is more gray than blue most of the time because of weather. The antennas themselves are a benign white, and the photo sims that we produced showed some visibility from a mile away, from up on like Brookfield Street and across the hill there. And you don't notice color at that distance. You just, see something on the horizon, and you're looking at 10 feet. I would argue that it's sufficiently camouflaged just by
It seems so.
location.
Shelley, do you have any thoughts on that? Or?
I think camouflage, looking downward at it, like again, to talk about from an aircraft's perspective, is not good. So camouflaging in this case would not be a benefit in keeping it, as this area gets more densely saturated with these things. It's just, I agree with what Dave said. How far is it from the most direct residential area? Like, I know you have like a tenant, it's on a tenant property, but
I think we're about 1,000 feet from the street, and then there's some houses just off the street, so maybe 700 to 900 feet away from the houses.
you'd really have to wander through the woods before you even saw this thing.
We couldn't see it from down the bottom of the property. And even as we walked up to the property, it took me a while before I could actually see the balloon up there, to even see where they were standing to do it. It took me a while to even see that. Yeah.
And we put the balloon up, leaf off. It gets more densely foliated with the foliage. You're not going to see it.
Even with the
Not same as non-reflective. Seems more than
It's like it's galvanized. I'm sorry.
Galvanized non-reflective surface is probably the most camouflage.
Exactly. We call that a camouflage color. We can paint it pink. We can do whatever people want, but the more you try to hide it.
Brad?
No, it's all right. You guys covered it.
I think we conclude we don't need camouflage. What's the next one?
So the next one you'll actually need to take a vote is on the waiver to allow this to be a height of 130 feet or 15 feet above the average tree canopy. So that's actually, you need a vote on that. And I think from everything that we've heard from Mr. Maxon and all of the review that we've done, it does seem that this is appropriate to allow additional carriers to be on there and in the appropriate location to eliminate the need for additional towers to fill this gap. You will need to vote on that.
We have a motion then to grant that waiver for the...
Grant a waiver for the 30 feet.
Yes.
We have a motion and a second.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor? I vote yes.
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 Brad?
Yes.
Great.
And then finally would be a motion to grant the special permit and site plan approval requested with the conditions of approval that I've recommended. There are 15 in total. You all have a copy in front of you, and the applicant has a copy as well. I can read them if you think it's necessary.
I don't, unless you think the public might want it.
We'll definitely put a copy on the
That's fine, yeah.
website.
I think that, yep, that's fine then. Okay, We have a motion then to grant this.
I make a motion to grant the, as a,
As indicated, yeah, with the conditions. Yep. So we have a motion then to grant the permit with these conditions. We have a second?
second.
You made the motion, did you?
Yes, Wally made the motion.
Second. Any other discussion on that? If not, I vote yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Brad?
Brad,
Yes.
Very good.
now you can close the hearing. I realize it's a little backwards today, but
I think it's a good idea. So we'll have a motion then to close the public hearing.
Moved. Second.
Second. Discussion, all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Brad?
Brad
Yes.
votes yes. Great.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You guys get to go home early tonight.
All right. Thank you, David.
All righty, thank you. Good luck.
You put up the presentation, we'll put up the just give us a second,
All right,
and we'll
good.
get the presentation up.
Okay, so while you're doing that, we can go over any old and new business. Do you have any old and new business? Any old and new business?
No.
Nothing for me.
Brad, any old and new business?
Nothing for me.
Okay, great. So now we'll have a brief presentation on the Sturbridge Historic Commission's Historic Preservation Plan. I think we talked about it briefly in our last meeting, that this would be coming up. And
Bye.
I'll go through. Wally is also on the Historic Commission, so he can certainly join in and help with this
Okay.
as we move forward. But Jean, you might want to just give a little background on how we get into this and the...
Yeah, so can you go to the first slide? So actually, a couple of years ago, I worked with the Historic Commission to apply for a grant from the National Park Service, actually through Mass Historic, to obtain funding to develop the first ever historic preservation plan for the community. And we ended up receiving $15,000, and we received $20,000 the matching fund from the Community Preservation Committee. So we worked for the past year and a half or so on preparing the plan, and we did have a lot of community engagement. We had a survey, we had a couple of public forums, and with the purpose of trying to provide a vision for preservation and guidance regarding actions that should be taken to support historic preservation as we move forward for the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Planning Board as you're making decisions on demolition delay and things like that. And just being more cognizant and aware of what is worth preserving, because just because it's old doesn't mean it's worthy of preservation. So that's what we had hoped to achieve with this plan.
Very good. And so this also kind of identifies the issues and challenges that are related to historic preservation. And actually, the Sturbridge Historic Commission has done a good job in the past in studying and documenting certain buildings and so forth. So there has been some work on what was, considered to be buildings of a historic nature based on their age and so forth. But there's certainly other things that are shown here in the bullet that present challenges. And so the one thing that we really want to try to do with these presentations is have some communication and coordination between the departments and commissions. I mean, one of the reasons for this is to identify the historic assets, and then if a project comes forward or something that might impact historic asset, have something they can look at and recognize what that historic asset is and what can be done to make sure it's preserved as much as possible, really. I think really the first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The first two are the ones that probably relate most. The where you have the reuse and redevelopment of historic properties that would come before various boards, and we should certainly be aware of the historic significance. Then also potential impacts that new projects might have on existing historic resources. The others, certainly storage of historic records and objects is something the town clerk, Historic Commission, the Historic Society is interested in. Local historic districts are always one of the tools that can be used. Historic properties and cemeteries management, that's one thing I think that Sturbridge has had quite a leadership in. We've been spending quite a bit of the community preservation, not quite a bit, we have spent community preservation funds every year on preservation of our historic cemetery, starting with the one right next to this building, but also work going on in the North Cemetery as well. So I think that probably compared to a lot of communities around here, our gravestones and memorials are in pretty good shape. And then another big part of it is certainly generating awareness and enthusiasm for historic resources. And we saw that, I think, from the survey, the initial survey, there is a lot of interest. And I think that, it did become apparent that Sturbridge residents generally take pride in the town's history and its architecture and value preservation. And certainly need to document these resources before they're lost. So this gives the overall recommendations of certain projects. And other than the historic survey plans that might, and the other surveys that might identify more areas or bring more areas to our attention, the others are probably tools that are more related. The Historic Commission, and I don't know if there's any up there that you can think of, Gene, that might be important, say, to the planning board, for example.
I think the ones, at the beginning, I think the historic survey plan, as you mentioned, and then it would be, working with the commission on various bylaws. If the commission decides there's support to go that way, then obviously we would be involved with that as well, because maybe a zoning bylaw or some maybe a general bylaw. And then I think, as you said, the rest are really for kind of town administration to figure out, what we're going to do about some of these sensitive records that need to be stored in an appropriate manner. And then the others are really for the commission, things like, adding to our walking tours and engaging the public.
Yeah. And we do have a demolition delay bylaw, and, we're aware of that. And,
Yeah. And I guess I could add to that, for instance, Zoning Board of Appeals, we're updating the application to make sure that people are giving us the year the home is built. So if they're coming in for a demo and a rebuild, it's kind of flagging that. And that was one of the issues that came up in commission meetings, that there needs to be a way to flag that. So at least in our department, we're doing that, but I think we need to outreach to others like the building department to, find a way to make sure they're looking at that as well.
Good. Ollie, anything to add on that?
No, the historic inventory, something that was just again, and that ongoing thing. And that's doing an inventory of all the historic buildings and areas in town. That is extremely important. weeks ago. That'd be awesome. That's one of the things in the expansion of the survey. And then focused areas of the survey, 20 and Route 131, and areas around the ponds and lakes. Areas around the ponds and lakes are very, like mine, they're very historic areas that, as far as houses go, architecturally wise. And the architectural survey was done back, I think, in 2015. And that was an area in town that was surveyed that had areas that were primitive, indigenous peoples, and that was a great thing to have, to be able to preserve and to have awareness of. And the landscape survey or something that is scenic roads and things like that. That's also very, very good. I think that so far with the preservation plan they have was very specific as far as the needs. short-term, long-term, and ongoing that were done. And I think it was well done. It was very well done. It gives us some as being our first preservation plan, it gives us a very good path to take to maintain everything now. After all, we're Sturbridge. History is our thing. And this is a very good tool.
How are you guys approaching to identify what is a historic property or a historic landmark or land? Is it through records primarily, ownership records that are filed?
Actually, what ends up happening, if you have a house, let's say any one of the houses here on Charlton Street, or even a house next door here, that has that you know that obviously it's all
Visual observation
yes.
and some
The companies that come in and do the inventory will do a search of every record regarding that house as far as the owners go. They do not only an architectural survey of the house, they do a historic narrative of the house as well, along with photographs and everything else. So they have that. They'll go through that entire building.
Yeah, the way they actually started, David, early on, years ago in the late 60s and the 70s, the Historic Commission, Agnes Wilkins and a few others that were on there, actually started by doing them themselves. They took the forms and they began to document the area around the Common, because the Common is actually a National Historic District, on the National Register. And then they also began to do Fiskdale, but then as things went on, outside firms were brought in. And of course, the age of the house and having focused on areas that were, originally, developed or settled in the town, kind of leads you toward a lot of the older houses. As we move more onto the newer surveys, then we have to decide what else becomes historic. I mean, there are buildings really from the last century and even, really into this century that become kind of important, like certain styles or...
Yeah, so what determines the criteria of who decides whether, okay, this is worthy of further investigation, or has it been altered in such a way that there's not much of it left?
That's a good question. We talk about that ourselves. We say if you have a house, a historic house, it's like it was built in 1889. However, it's been restored so many times and rehabbed so many times and changed, and the only thing that's really existing is maybe a cellar hole that's still there, and everything else has changed about it. Is it still a historic house? If it just exists as a colonial house, but there's nothing about it historic, is it really historic? Is the bone still there that makes it that way? That's a good question. It's a great argument to have, but it's something that would still be recorded that way. Then you get to the point, okay, what is considered historic in recent history? 50 years, as the state says, 50 years past is historic. We in Sturbridge would consider 100 years back as further. However, there are some things in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s that is historic, depending upon the architecture. And mid-century modern architecture is extremely prevalent. But do you want every Cape Cod and small 1960s and colonial, Garrison Colonial on the historic register? That is, you don't want to go to that point, however, but if you do have something like there are historic mid-century modern houses on Cedar Street going up the side, the flat roof things, all the glass, those are unique. Those are unique for that time and era. So those things that you say, okay, if the time comes, are they historic, relatively historic, and that you decide to add to an inventory. But an entire development built in 1958, even though it is in that time frame the state requires, to really meet the needs. So there is a lot of going back and forth about things like that.
So once you've gone through some of this process, and apparently it's very ongoing, you're creating a database, you mentioned. Is that database something that could be used on permit applications?
Actually, we use it right now. So, for instance, we just had a house recently on one of the lakes, and they wanted to tear down and rebuild. And the assessor's property card listed it at 1839 or something. And we knew we had recently surveyed that, and the assessor's card wasn't actually right. It was actually built in 1947, and there were stories passed down from generations that portions of some house in Vermont were somehow incorporated into this. So we do refer back to that survey data. And in fact, that's one of our big list of projects, is we want to take the survey work that's been done and compare it with the dates that the assessors have and try to make corrections where we can. So, and this information is all on the Historic Commission's section of the website, which we will be revamping this year to add a lot more resources. We have the inventory sheets now, but we'll actually have an interactive map where you can click on a parcel and it will pull up all of this inventory data. It's helpful for the building inspector if he's looking at, someone comes in for a demolition permit, or, planning board, you mostly deal with commercial, but zoning board in particular, we deal with a lot of tear down and rebuilds. So, so yeah, it has been very helpful, and it's actually really interesting if you have time just to read some of them. It amazes me the information they're able to pull up on some of these properties.
Yeah, and I can see as Sturbridge progresses demographically, I think you'll probably see a lot more tear down and rebuilds occurring.
Right. And then, so what happens is, if a home is 100 years old or older, they cannot tear that down without going before the Historic Commission. And for the purpose of, we have a demolition delay bylaw. So when it goes before the commission, the applicant would have to explain what their project is, what their proposal, and then the commission would take that information and, based on information that we have, make a determination if it's preferably preserved. And we have a 12-month demolition delay. So if it were a significant structure, the commission determined it's preferably preserved, say that 10 times fast, it doesn't mean that the person can't tear it down, but it means it kind of gives that cooling off period with the hopes of encouraging them to maybe adaptive reuse the building in some way. In some cases, a building can be moved. The small barn at the public house was moved. The old fairgrounds building, that was demolished. That's something that, was...
Although that building had been altered many times.
Right.
And fires. And,
Exactly.
I think it was what it was and where it was in this case
It had
that
a lot
made
of
it
historic
historical than the actual
significance.
Or like
structure.
Oxhead, where they're talking about
Yes.
trying to tear that down, but that has a lot of historical
Right.
relevance.
That has changed locations like 3 times.
That's what I
Yeah.
heard,
physically.
It
yeah.
was moved here, yeah.
So is there any restriction or modification of historic buildings?
No.
For instance, like an energy efficient upgrade to mini split system? Could you put that on any old historic
We
property?
don't have a historic district, we have a common historic district now, but it has no restrictions on it, so at all. And we don't have any other localized historic districts yet that have anything like paint color, mini splits, things like that. We don't have that at all in town. So you're even here in the common district, you're pretty much, because there are those restrictions.
Yeah, and even on local historic districts that do have architectural requirements to be met, it's usually just the structure is it's visible from public ways and so forth. So in other words, if somebody wanted to put like an upgrade inside, there's, even in local historic district, there's really not any restrictions for that. It's more, the appearance and the preservation of the original architectural features of the building.
Okay. Is there any incentive to register as a historical structure? Like, so for instance, if you wanted to demo or you wanted to redo something, I mean, I'd hate to then on
Yeah,
top
if you're
of
in
it.
a national historic district, you do qualify for some grants or loans, but the problem is that there just aren't very many of them.
Right.
So, I mean, it's nice to say that you could apply for these things, but there's not a lot of money and there's not a lot that you can do with them, but it does open up that possibility.
What about the impact of the owners of those properties? How would they benefit or not, depending on the status of things?
I think for some people, it's the acknowledgement of the structure. It's, it's quite a process to go through to get your property listed. So if you're somebody undertaking that, then obviously you kind of have an interest in history, you understand the significance of your building, and you want to go forward. But there's also things like historic building tax rehab,
There is
rehab
potential
tax
benefits
credits,
for
yeah.
folks.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And even a few years ago, the commission did a plaque program. So homes that were eligible to be listed were given a plaque with it just said the
Date,
year built,
yeah.
the date built.
Any more slides? I think there's a few more.
That's a sample of the form. And we just kind of talked about all of this. So, And then these are some of the documents that are available through Mass Historic Commission. Next slide. And, but the plan and all the inventory sheets, like I said, you can find those on the Historic Commission section of our website. And also Wally will be working with us to take some of he's done a lot of work in posting things on the Historic Society's Facebook page. And so we'll be adding a lot of that to our town webpage as well.
So I invite you, gentlemen, if you're on Facebook, and you do go there occasionally, not everybody does, but if you do go there, look up the British Historical Society and join that. And just usually, I try to do at least a couple of essays, 2 long essays every week, and there's a lot of the photographs and stuff on there. And it's a lot of, during this research, we have found a lot of things we never knew about the town.
I'm sure.
There's so much more available now.
Is that posted elsewhere other than Facebook?
No, it's there. It's there. It may be in print by the end of the year. A lot of the stories and a lot of the essays, but there's no place else.
Right, although Gene said we are going to try to get some of the things on there.
On
On the
the
historic,
town
yes,
website.
yes,
Historic
that's right.
Commission's web.
But right now there is not.
Because they really have generated a lot of interest. You're not just
Yeah.
mentioning something. Good. Great. Well, thank you all for listening, and at least we're aware we have the plan.
Yeah.
Anything
For the
else?
presentation.
Very good. A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Brad, aye.